Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. We'll get started here in a couple of minutes. Want to give folks a couple of minutes to join who are hopping on now. So I'll go on mute in just a few minutes. We'll get started. Okay, we are about a couple minutes past the hour. I know a few more folks were jumping on, but did want to go ahead and get started here. Hello, my name is Katie Halpin. I am part of the digital sales team here at SailPoint. Thank you all for joining this webinar regarding how AI can enhance your identity and security program. Wanted to make a couple of introductions. Jen Frieder is on our field marketing side. She will be assisting and helping me answer some questions throughout. And then, of course, the main star here is our Eric Pelletier, who I'll pass the mic to here in just a moment for the presentation. A couple of housekeeping items to get started. I will have a Q&A chat box. So if you do have questions throughout, feel free to chat them in that Q&A box. We will have some pauses throughout, so we will ensure that we get to your questions. This session is being recorded, so you will receive a copy of the recording after the call. Thanks so much, and Eric, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Katie. My name is Eric Pelletier. I work at SailPoint, and my general role is that of Principal Solutions Consultant. In that role, I work with some of our largest customers in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and New York City metro regions. And today I'm going to take you through some areas where I think you'll see that SailPoint is applying the power of artificial intelligence, machine learning to accelerate your identity security program. So just as a bit of background, as we start out, 94% of breaches are identity related. I think most of you on this call probably have heard a stat that's similar to this, and maybe it's 94, or maybe it's 98, or maybe it's 90, but in any case, there's a lot of them that are identity related, which means it's important as we go through our digital transformations to ensure that we are enhancing our identity security programs by bringing on more roles, by governing more people against more applications into the cloud, on-prem, the data that we have, we need to govern their access to. However, getting people connected to the right resources and governing that access has moved well beyond human capacity. There are too many certifications. It's too hard to build a roles program. The roles become stagnant right after I build them. I can't find the risky users in my organization. These types of questions are the questions that I'm going to help you to see how SailPoint has applied artificial intelligence and machine learning to solve for you. So moving into how we can govern more, faster, is requiring AI. So we apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to do a couple of major things that have major downstream impact. So proactively highlight high-risk conditions or users, find the people in your organization that represent the most risk and point them out to you so that you can govern them more carefully. And in the normal governance activities that we go through, let's refocus human interaction on higher value decisions. So in order to do that, I'm going to show you basically 5 scenarios, and I won't read them all out right now, but essentially the theme on each one of these is going to be, yes, these are things that I've been trying to do for years in my identity security program. And some areas I've been very successful in, but some I want to go faster in, and some I want to get into. So each one of these areas that we're going to look at is going to highlight how SailPoint can use AI to make these processes better. So the first one we're going to start with is the classic governance situation, access reviews. So how can we use AI to make access reviews better than they used to be? So in order to start out, let me just give you an example access review. Here's an access review that I might ask somebody in my business to review the access of Barrett and see all the access that Barrett has. I may ask them to say yes or no by clicking the check or the X. But what does the business tell us? The business usually tells us, there's too many things in this list. I have too many items to govern. Second, I don't know what these things do. I'm not really sure if Barrett needs this access. So generally speaking, I rubber stamp the whole thing and click OK so that it's completed. How can AI assist this and make it better? The way we do that is on the right-hand side, you'll see the decision support that was added with AI. And what does decision support do? It provides a recommendation. So if I click on the recommendation, it's going to tell me some facts about this level of access and whether it should be kept or removed. We're saying, no, recommend it. Why? Well, because only 13% of identities with the location have this access. Only 16% of identities with the same department have this access. 75% of identities in the same peer group have this access. The idea really is we have used AI and machine learning to provide some useful insight to the reviewer so the reviewer can actually make a good decision to potentially take this away. In the case of a keep, we can view that recommendation as well, and we can see similar statistics. The idea is that we are applying AI and ML to assist the business to make good decisions to lower the risk level of any individual identity and slowly move people's entitlements in line with their business functions. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions in the Q&A box.
Hi, it does look like we have one. So one question from our panel is, how much effort would it take to get to where AI is running my business access reviews?
That's not surprising that you got that. That's my most common question. And one of the things that SailPoint has done uniquely as we've deployed AI and ML into our identity ecosystem is to apply a concept that we call unsupervised learning. It's not really a concept we call, it's an AI approach. And unsupervised learning means you don't have to tweak it, tune it, or adjust it, or move any switches or buttons over time to make it work. It means it learns on its own over time. And in the next section, I'll show you how it does that.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
Was that the only question, Katie?
That's all we have right now.
Okay.
Yep.
The other question I oftentimes get is, well, nice. I'm thankful that you can make the business experience of doing access reviews better for my business. But what about the auditors? Are they okay with this? Do they push back against the system recommending access? And the answer is, by and large, no. And the reason is pretty simple. All of these recommendations, they travel with the review item. So it is, in fact, Amanda, in this case, who made the decision, but she may have based that decision on the recommendations which travel with the item, so that the auditors know, firstly, that the decision was made by Amanda, but two, they also see the reasons upon which she may or may not have made that decision. So ordinarily, the auditors are looking for completeness, accuracy, full disclosure all the way through the process. So they're quite happy with it. Anyway, let me move on to the next section that I'd like to highlight today. And this also is going to explain how a little bit of our AI and ML functions behind the scenes. Let me use a couple of illustrations to do that for you. And I'm going to kind of couch that in a use case that says, you know, obviously, I want my users to have only the access that they need and no extra. And I also want to find my risky users, the ones with inappropriate access. How can I do that? So basically, what we're looking at is these are all the identities in your organization. That's as many as I could fit on the screen anyway, but a number of identities. What are you going to look at each individual one? How can we evaluate these? And using the power of AI and ML, we can do that for you. So we can find the inappropriate users proactively. We look at all the users and we determine which ones have anomalous access. How do we do that? Well, firstly, we take all of the users in the organization and we assemble them into what we call peer groups. Now, these clusters of users that you see on the screen now really represent users that have similar access. They have similar access and they perform a similar function. Now, you see the anomalous users are sort of in the middle there. They are not associated with a peer group. And turns out that's how we're able to find users that don't have consistent access with any peer group. Therefore, we can suspect that they have anomalous access. And there's two types. There are two types of anomalous users. There are what we call structural outliers, and you see these straddle multiple peer groups. They're kind of in the middle of several peer groups. The most common reason for this in the business, somebody started 13 years ago and they've had 7 different jobs over the years. They've get all the access to do their new job, but they didn't quite lose the access to do their old job. So we can identify them as structural outliers. The second type of outliers are what we call low similarity outliers. And it's because they have a weak similarity to a single peer group or no peer group at all. And most common reason for these are because they are joiners who have gotten birthright access, but don't quite have enough access to do their job. We're going to see as we move forward how we can help these outliers to get into a peer group firmly such that they would be able to have the access that they need to do their jobs. But in the meantime, SailPoint is able to produce a report and show you a dashboard of all of the outliers in your organization. And so you can say, well, I had 600 folks in the organization, 47 of them are outliers. What can I do to get them more consistent access? How can I lower the risk associated with having outliers? And the way I do that, I can click right in there on that box. And for any individual, I could create a certification. This is a list of all the individuals who have outlying access when they became outliers and so forth. So I could create a certification, assign it to maybe their boss or someone to review that access, or I can click in, get a little more details. I could ignore it if I know that Alex is an outlier for a very good reason. But I could also look at the history of any one of my users, and I can determine when they got and lost certain access. So when I look at this individual, I can see that I have a person that has access to earnings announcements and domain admins. Now that's unusual for someone in the inventory department. So I can start to see why this person's an outlier. They have entitlements they probably shouldn't have. So we're able to do quite a bit of investigation on those outliers so that you can lower that number. And so not only not have to find them, but then minimize the number of outliers that you have. So let me stop there, see if there's any questions.
Doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat box for now, Eric. We'll keep going.
All right, that sounds good. So earlier I said we had outliers who maybe didn't have enough access to do their job. They weren't structural outliers, but it's a common problem where I have, say, a new joiner and they get some birthright access. They get their email account, they get their AD account, they get their Office 365 account, they get their Salesforce account, they get some access to Amazon. But they didn't get everything they need. And so that means those users have to avail themselves of the access request system. The access request system is historically, I've been doing this a long time, and for the last 20 years, the access request system was always kind of problematic because users would go into it, they wouldn't know what they were looking for. They thought they knew, but they didn't know the names of the entitlements. And so there ended up being, way too many things to pick from. So invariably they picked the wrong thing, or they got tired of it more likely and called the help desk or their boss or their peers and tried to figure out what it is that they needed. Imagine a world where you walk into the access request experience and it provides you recommendations that are structured directly for you. So where we had, 12,542 potential entitlements to ask for, here, SailPoint Cloud is using artificial intelligence to recommend access that would be just for this individual. In other words, access that would make this person, Reagan, more firmly ensconced within their peer group, move them closer to the center. So in this case, Reagan has come in, Reagan has to work for the weekend. Imagine Reagan's surprise when they see remote users as the first recommendation. My goodness, now I can log into the VPN over the weekend simply by requesting the item that was already recommended for me. And as a side note, SailPoint doesn't force all users to come into SailPoint to do these recommendations. You can also do them over Slack or Teams or ServiceNow. So we hear a number of times, my users in my organization, they don't want a new access request system. They want to go to ServiceNow where they always go, or they want to do things in Slack because that's where we're moving to. We're doing a lot in Slack. We're doing a lot in Teams. So we can actually create access requests right in those platforms. And I can go ahead and submit that. And the approval will come into Slack as well. So let's say, for example, Patricia has made this request. Now, all of a sudden, we have the boss that needs to approve it, or the approver that needs to approve that before it can be provisioned. So all of that can take place in ServiceNow or Slack or Teams. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions so far.
We do have one. It's what if I have multiple approvers within the system? Is that possible?
Yes, that's a great question too, because really we have a lot of customers who say, well, the approval rules or policies in my organization are not consistent. They're not the same for every entitlement. How can SailPoint help me with that? So on a requestable item basis, essentially, in SailPoint, you can specify what the approval chain looks like. You don't have to do it in Slack. You don't have to do it in Teams. You don't have to do it in ServiceNow. You do that in SailPoint on the SailPoint side, and it'll route the approvals accordingly.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. That's all we have for now.
Great. So I just saw another one pop up. Did you see that one, Katie, or no?
Yes, I did. So how does the AI and ML model work on dependent applications and systems? Examples of combination of AD groups and internal apps, authorization and entitlements.
Yes. So when you have an ecosystem of access, that essentially means, I want to do this one function, but I actually need an Office 365 account in order to be able to authenticate to an external cloud system or something along those lines. I'm using a federated model. There's the primary way to handle that would be to aggregate that access. I don't mean aggregate in the SailPoint word. I mean group that access into a role or an access profile. So you group those pieces together, and they are requested as a unit. So it's a single request that ends up as a fulfillment item being those several individual downstream areas of access.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. We did have another question come in. What is the outcome of off certifications and approval? Will it update the roles and entitlements for the user, provision and deprovision?
So yes, I mean, that's the single word answer is yes. Generally speaking, at the conclusion of a certification event, any items that were revoked during that certification will be removed from the user. So that user will be net less access. And that's kind of the point. That's the hope. That said, that's not always, the day one state that you want. You may want to have a certain second set of eyes over revocations before you process them, because you don't want to do something destructive. There is an interim area where we could just cut tickets in like ServiceNow or something along those lines, whatever help desk system you have, and then those can be reviewed prior to being fully acted on. Those are the two options. But generally speaking, we want to actually do the deprovisioning access in a timely manner to make sure that users have the minimum amount that they need.
Wonderful. And thank you for the questions, you guys.
Yeah, very much appreciated. The next area I want to talk about is another classic problem. I probably told you this 4 times, but I've been doing this a long time. And during that long time, one of the standard problems that we've looked to solve in a variety of different ways is to get roles functional for an organization. Enterprise comes and they say, we're not a roles-based organization. We want to be a roles-based organization. We want to use RBAC or ABAC or a different model that we've come up with here. But we have 2 primary problems with that. The first is that it's real expensive to analyze all our data and build the roles out. That's the first problem. The second problem is that the roles stagnate over time. So the project begins, the project ends, and then the roles immediately begin to stagnate over time. So what do? I don't want to go deleting my old roles. I want the business to keep working the way it does. So I create new roles. So I end up with role proliferation and role stagnation. And all of that was quite expensive, by the way. So how can we make it less expensive and easier to create roles? And secondarily, how can we evolve the roles we've built as opposed to just creating new roles on top of them to band-aid the problem until I end up with, a roles proliferation situation. So for this, sort of scenario, it all starts with search. So here I've come in, I want to search for everybody in the inventory department. That's what I want to do. I want to build roles based on a department, and I get to choose whatever elements I want to use, but I'll go ahead and I can save this search for another time, or I can learn how to make these queries. If it's not obvious how to do it, I can use query help, but I want to create roles for the inventory department. So I can click on that. The system now has basically analyzed all of those people, and it has created some potential roles for me. And I can look at some details of that role. So I look for everyone in the inventory department. So it's not surprising that the top department's inventory, but the job titles are inventory analysts 1 through 3. That's kind of consistent with what I'd expect. And then I have a couple of different locations here. So we're basically giving you some high-level information on the group of identities that are potentially fitting this role. And if I'm satisfied with that, I can move on to the next section where I can work on this role. And so here I'm presented with a histogram, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 entitlements that I have in common. So we have 34 identities potentially here, and we have 100% overlap on 3 elements of access and 97% on others. Now, I can move this along to look further into the the role entitlement, but I can see that the overlap goes, it drops off a cliff from where we already put it. But I can reset this if I want to. Or I can look at the actual entitlements. I can see the entitlements that are here and determine whether they're appropriate or not. I can also decide to exclude entitlements if I'd like to. I want to exclude Austin because I know I want to kind of cover TyPi as well here. So we're going to exclude that one. And then I can go ahead and create my role from there. And when I create the role, it's going to ask me for a role name. It's going to ask me for who owns the role. And then it's going to build the role so that future people who come into the inventory department as analysts 1, 2s, or 3s are going to get the access that they need. And the major news here is, as a business analyst, I was able to go through this process. I didn't have to get involved with any of my developers to pull the data that I needed. I didn't have to take this data, put it into a spreadsheet, and then sit in a room full of folks to try to determine which entitlements are most common or not. The system's doing a lot of the hard work behind the scenes using AI and ML. And as a business analyst, I'm in a much better position to rapidly develop and ultimately deploy roles. So that's the building and deploying part. But what about the maintenance of roles on an ongoing basis? And to that end, SailPoint uses AI and ML to provide what we call role insights. Now, role insights essentially allow us to be able to look at roles over time with AI and ML and make recommendations to make them better than they were before. So I can look at sales enterprise, and it says there's 5 people in there, and there's one entitlement that the system's recommending that I add. If I want to click on that and get into the details, I can see that. I can see that it wants to add sales enterprise box folder to this entitlement. So this gives me the ability to modify my roles, make them more relevant over time, so that they will be in a better position to serve the enterprise. And theoretically, I won't be building new roles, Sales Enterprise 2 or Sales Enterprise 7, on top of the existing ones. I'll be able to maintain the ones I have. Now, interestingly enough, 5 identities have this role today, and 0 of those 5 would be impacted if I simply added Sales Enterprise box folder to the entitlement payload. That says to me that all 5 of the identities already have this extra entitlement. So what am I doing if I add this? Well, I'm doing 2 things. One, I'm making sure that in access reviews, we don't have an extra entitlement for the users to review. It'll be rolled up as part of the sales enterprise role. That's number 1. But number 2, as more sales executives come on board, they'll get all the access they need, or more of the access they need, instead of having to go into access request to try to get the little bits of access that we left behind, when we onboarded them. So onboarding will be smoother, access reviews will be smoother, the organization's identity security program will run smoother as a consequence. So let me stop there for a moment. Katie, are there any questions so far?
Yes, we did have a question come in from Edvin. So does AI and ML work for IIQ as well? I know this has all been shown in Identity Now, so quick question about that.
Yes and correct. So yes, it works for IdentityIQ. And yes, I have been showing all of this from an Identity Now perspective.
Yes.
So I will point out, that there are a few differences, definitely for sure. I can think of one where role insights is not something that we're offering for IdentityIQ. I'm sorry, that wasn't true. Role insights is fine. Structural outlier reporting is something we're not doing for IIQ. Role insights, definitely, we have that for IIQ. And then the next section that you're going to see, extending visibility into the into cloud workloads, is more enhanced in IdentityIQ and not quite as far along in IDN. So for the most part, there's parity, but there are different levels in depending on which side you're on.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. One more question from Joe. Will this also trigger changes in access for individuals and roles that are modified, or when an LCM event takes place or an access request is made?
Okay, so I think there's a bunch of pieces there, but the higher level answer to the question is yes, this would impact everyone who has the sales enterprise role if I chose to add enterprise box folder. But in this case, 5 people already have this role and 0 would be impacted because there would be no LCM requirement because they already have this level of access. So what would happen is sales enterprise box folder would just kind of fall under the sales enterprise role for them. But to the question's point, if it said 7 identities had this role and 2 identities would be impacted, number one, I could look at them to see who they were. I could click on that. And number 2, yes, those 2 identities who didn't have sales enterprise box folder would get it. So hopefully that covers most of the aspects of that question.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric.
All right, so the last area that I want to show you how AI and ML and SailPoint in general is starting to extend the boundaries of identity security is around the area of looking at cloud workloads. So extending visibility to secure cloud workloads is quite a mouthful, but really what it says is, I have business applications that used to run in my basement, my data center. And now I've moved those workloads into AWS. That's just an example. It could be Azure or GCP, but I've moved those workloads into infrastructure as a service. I used to be able to see very clearly who had access to my data center, but I don't have as much visibility into those infrastructure as a service clouds. Why is that? Well, the first reason is ordinarily, especially in AWS, I'll use AWS as an example, but the others pretty much follow suit. I usually have some federated source for authenticating and privileging or authorizing users. So they're authenticating in Okta and they're getting their entitlement payload there, but that's getting processed through an AWS policy engine to figure out what they can really do. So I'm blind, essentially. All I can see is what access they have based on the IDP, whether that's Ping or Microsoft Okta, whatever it is. I can look at that. I can see what groups they have, for example, and I can see the description of those groups, but I can't see what that'll do relative to the infrastructure as a service provider because it hasn't run through the policy engine. So that's really the idea here. So let's see how that can potentially work. The way I want to show you that is by vehicle of access review. So we're going to look at an access review here. And we'll click on this engineering Azure access. And so what I see here, of course, is my decision support, but let's just look at the line item for a moment. Its name is Eng Stage. Its description is engineering stage, which isn't really helping me very much, but at least it has a name and a description. But I see the cloud enabled screen, which I'm going to get to in a second, but there's also decision support. I can click on that and I can see how AI and ML is going to help me to make a better decision. Yeah. But if I want to get more details into the cloud access, I can click on the cloud enabled screen, which is going to bring me into the details of this entitlement, just like I can go into details of any entitlement. But now I'm starting to see how I have access into AWS. So AWS, I have 157 EC2 resources. If I click on that, I can see them all. And what's going on here is that one group, that group entitlement called Eng Stage, has been processed through all the JSON expressions of the access policies that are in AWS. And we have essentially been able to create a graphic that shows all of the access that this person would have if they were to log in to AWS and look at that access there. And I can also I can look at the Microsoft access as well. I can see the Azure access in the same way. So what we're doing there is we're really pulling back the curtain on the IDP and giving you that ability to look and see the access that someone would have in the infrastructure as a service. It's just going to allow us to have that much more visibility and that much more capability to appropriately govern with full information. So let me stop there and see if there's any questions to that point, to this point.
I'm just going to hop back a bit. We did have a question come in on the previous pause from Daniela. So I want to go back to her question in the chat. Are the roles in AI the same with the IT roles in IIQ? And which data element in IIQ database does it map to?
Okay, can you read the second part of that question again?
Yes, it says, which data element in IIQ DB does it map to?
Okay, so what happens with IdentityIQ relative to the role creation? It's actually creating business roles and then the IT roles underneath it. So what it would do in the IdentityIQ situation, if I had created one of those roles, it would have created a business role named whatever I wanted to call it. And then it would have created one IT role per application that was included in the entitlement payload. And it would have nested them underneath there. So if you looked in IIQ, you would see the business role name that was created and then one IT role for each application that was involved in that entitlement payload. I hope that was a good answer, a clear answer. And secondly, the question around which database elements are used. So I said earlier that AI is we use a self-learning methodology, but it does require some initial setup. So every user's IdentityIQ instance is a little different with which identity metadata they use routinely. Some have created their own, some have used the ones out of the box. We don't know that going in. So as part of the setup for the AI and ML piece, we do a discovery session with the customer to determine which data elements are relevant for that particular user. So some people use cost center, some people use department, some people use DPT. We will learn that in the discovery session and map those data elements accordingly.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. That's all we
Great.
had now.
Excellent. So, let's that was the last sort of piece that I wanted to show you, but then let's talk about, how you get there, how you get from where you're at today, wherever that happens to be, to this place where you can increase the velocity of your identity security program because you're adding AI and ML. I mean, it first starts with what our advantages are as a provider. It's continuous delivery. The AI and ML pieces are delivered through SaaS, and every single customer has the exact same version that every other customer has. Every time we make a change to one customer, we make it to all. Well, how can we do that? We do that because we use microservices as the fundamental building blocks. And so our development teams are developing, testing, QAing a piece. And then when they deploy it, they're really just updating the underlying microservices so all of our customers get the same exact version at the same time. Secondly, configuration versus customization. We've taken an approach where we don't want to spend 6, 8, 10, 12 months building a program out like the old days were. We want you to configure a few things like I talked about earlier in the discovery session for deploying AI, and then we make a few tweaks, we turn something on, and then it starts to run on its own without constant care and feeding on the part of our customers. We know you're already stretched. Your administrative capabilities already stretched. We're asking you to do more with We're not, but your employers are asking you to do more with less, and we're giving you the tools to do exactly that, more with less. We monitor it. We manage it. You don't have to patch the AI piece or the ML pieces. Yes, if you're an IIQ customer, you will continue to run IIQ the same way you always have. But on the AI and ML side, you will not have additional work to do just because you've decided to avail yourself of the advantages of AI and ML. And the last one is multi-tenant microservice architecture. And really, the news there is about the ability to scale. Now, my IIQ customers ask me all the time, what's this going to do to my database? And I can tell them nothing. All of the data that's required to do these heavy AI and ML calculations is all up in the cloud. So it actually, if you turned off snapshots in IdentityIQ, your database would actually grow at a slower rate than it already does today. So impact to your on-prem is minimal to zero, and everything that is taking place up in the cloud in a multi-tenant microservice architecture. So, another area that we're oftentimes asked is, are you active? What are you doing? How are you building this? Are you making improvements? Are you adding more? Yes, at a breakneck pace. The point really for SailPoint is to listen to our customers and make the changes to the products that need to be made to make it easier to manage, faster to deploy, and more useful to the end goals of your identity security program. So that's what we did in 21. Here's what we're working on in 22. And I don't expect you to read all of these things, but these are the themes that we have planned for this year. And we've delivered on a bunch of these things already. And one other area, especially when I think about, migrating to SaaS, SailPoint has prided ourselves on transparency, laying out our public uptime statistics. You can look that stuff up. It is public and you can go and look at it. The documentation for the APIs that underpin all of this stuff, should you choose to avail yourself of those, all publicly documented. Our roadmap is also public. You can see how we've been doing, how you do it, and what we're working on, and so can anyone else. So what does that all mean? It means that today we can deliver actual outcomes, and we have real outcomes to talk about. Our customers leverage the speed of AI today. Some examples that I can think about, provisioning new employees, onboarding, as we say, in a couple of minutes instead of 14 hours. And 14 hours is not a bad deal, but take that to a couple of minutes in a high velocity environment where we're onboarding a lot of people. That's pretty amazing. Driving access review completion times down from a year to a month. Old-fashioned manual access reviews taking a year, we get them down, into 30 days. That's an actual outcome from an actual customer. Eliminating tens of thousands of self-service access requests, calls to the help desk. Saving actual money. Every call costs money. If we can eliminate 10,000 of those, we're saving significant money, and we've made the organization more secure as a bonus. So I'd really like to add you to the list of real outcomes, and look forward to working with any one of you in the future to see how we can help.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric, for that compelling presentation. We really appreciate all the attendees that joined today and for the questions throughout the presentation. You will be hearing from one of the field reps with the recording as promised. But again, we appreciate your time today and look forward to connecting with you guys soon. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.